Welcome and thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Lead to Win podcast, a podcast focused on exploring strategies, mindsets, and stories behind successful leadership and personal development. On today's episode, I visit with Rob Bier. Rob is a seasoned expert in building high-performance organizations with more than 25 years' experience in the field. He's worked with over 40 scale-ups, including 6 that became unicorns and 1 that reached decacorn status during the time he supported them. Some of his clients include Crypto.com, Traveloka, Trax Retail, Ninja Van, Ajaib, Credivo, and Property Guru. His outstanding track record as an advisor is based on strong foundations. He built 2 successful companies of his own, Spark, a fintech acquired by Citigroup, and Ant Factory, a pioneering venture capital firm and venture builder in Europe. Prior to that, he spent 12 years as a senior partner in the organizational performance practice of Monitor Group, now Monitor Deloitte, the leading strategy firm. He has also served on the management advisory board of Towerbrook Capital Partners, a private equity firm with $21 billion under management. Rob advises CEOs, runs powerful top team workshops, and leads organizational transformation projects. Regardless of how he engages, Rob's mission remains constant, equipping leaders with the insights, skills, and tools to become master organization builders, unlocking the highest performance levels within their organizations, and achieving smooth sailing. Rob's also the author of the acclaimed 2024 publication, Smooth Scaling: 20 Rituals to Build a High-Performing Organization. This book answers the question of why some businesses fail to scale, offering a clear diagnosis along with 20 practical rituals that boost performance and support frictionless growth. Excited for this conversation today as I welcome Rob Bier to the show. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. Let's do it. All right. Well, Rob, welcome to the show and thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Bo.
So I mentioned a little bit of your resume and your bio, but give us a little background on your journey and how you've kind of gotten where you are today.
Yeah, I guess I'm a bit of a generalist in the sense that I've spent 12 years as a strategy consultant, 12 years as an entrepreneur, and now 12 years as a leadership advisor working with Scale Up. So I come at that from all angles. And I've just always been obsessed with one thing, which is building great companies. And to me, great companies aren't just about the numbers. I mean, that's, of course, important, but often that's a bit of luck, whether you hit a really high growth curve or not. But it's about how well the company works internally, whether you build a high performing organization, get the most out of your people, have a great culture, have a sustainable business model. And that's been my kind of lifelong passion. As I say, I've come at it as a CEO, as an advisor, as an investor. So hopefully learned a few things along the way and tried to condense that wisdom into the book.
Absolutely. So I want to dive right into it. Something that I picked up on, kind of researching you and the work you do. You talk a lot about organizational friction. And, I want to know kind of what are the primary sources of organizational friction and how do they impact, the dynamics of the team and productivity of the team?
Sure. I mean, maybe the best way to think about it is to first look at what's a perfect organization, right? A perfect organization is one where everybody's 100% clear on what they need to get done, what the strategy is, what the short-term objectives are. They're all totally aligned. They're all deeply committed. Each team is individually high performing. Every team works perfectly with every other team. There's no silos or barriers, right? Communication is great. As soon as something changes, everybody gets together and figures out what that means. You get it, right? And a friction is really anything that might interfere with that sort of theoretical perfect kind of organization. That can be something as simple as a miscommunication, right? I thought you meant one thing, and then but it got interpreted in my head differently than you meant it. Or it could be an interpersonal conflict. Maybe you and I had a run-in the past, and now we kind of avoid each other. We don't really sync up as much as we should because we're a bit nervous about the other person. Or it can be more, of a structural thing where, two departments are kind of trying to accomplish different things. They have slightly different goals. They're not working in a really tight way. So frictions can show up in all different ways, but really it's anything that prevents your organization from achieving that kind of theoretical perfection.
Yeah, can you share some examples of how, organizational friction can kind of manifest within teams and across departments even, and that hinders progress and collaboration. Can you kind of share some examples of that?
Absolutely. So I guess the thing that has really struck me in the time that I've been working with clients is that to some degree, these frictions are a mathematical, unavoidable fact. And let me explain what I mean. If you're six people in a very baby startup and you're all sitting around your coffee table, all that kind of perfect coordination, collaboration, problem solving, alignment happens almost naturally, right? And when you're 12, it's still not so difficult. And when you're 50, it's still not so difficult. And then all of a sudden you're 150 and it's like, whoa, all kind of new stuff's going on that we didn't plan on. And the reason for that is that while your head count is growing kind of linearly, right? 25, 50, 75, 100, the complexity of your organization is growing exponentially because the number of interconnects between all those people is just growing as an exponential function. And you can't have the trust building and the communication and the going out for a beer and all the stuff that made it work so well when you're six. You just can't have that perfectly with between every person and every other person at 150. So people stop communicating, they stop building trust, they stop building relationships, not because they're doing anything wrong, but just because they're busy and there's too many other points in the organization to connect with. And that then leads to problems, right? Problems again of misunderstanding or bottleneck. Nobody wants to make a decision, or five people are all trying to make a decision because they think it's theirs to make. And so now all of a sudden decisions aren't getting made the way they were when there was perfect clarity as to roles and responsibilities. So, as I say, it's kind of a mathematical problem and it can never be solved perfectly. I don't think there is such a thing as a perfect organization of 150 or 1,000 people. But if you can see that coming, then there's a lot you can do to prevent it. So that's kind of the way I think about
Yeah, and speaking of that communication piece, how does ineffective communication contribute to that friction? And what are some strategies that leaders can employ to improve that communication and reduce that friction?
it. Okay, I'll give you a couple of examples. Small companies, typically what happens is the CEO deals, I call it bilaterally. So on a finance issue, talks to the finance person. Marketing issue, talks to the marketing person. Sales issue, talks to the sales person. And, yeah, a bit of a team meeting to sync up, but basically everything happens in a channel. And that feels fast in the short term because each of those meetings can be snappy and quick and they get perfectly aligned. But if there's a little bit of a shift in strategy, each of those people might hear something slightly different in those meetings. Maybe because they want to hear something different, maybe because the CEO is kind of pandering to them, making sure they feel okay about the strategy shift. He knows that they have certain, or she knows that they have certain sensitivities, wants to make it feel good for them. And so you get this kind of fragmentation effect where everybody's heard something slightly differently and then they take that back to their departments, their teams, their country operations. That gets amplified. And by the time you're 300 people and you're three layers down in the organization, people have very, very different understandings. So again, there's no bad intentions. Everybody's doing their best, but that CEO might have done better to put everybody in a room for a day. And maybe that would have felt slower than all those quick alignment one-on-ones, but that might have brought about a more unified and clarified and shared understanding of what that new direction or new strategy is. So that's one example where communication just gets refracted through the lens. It's like the old game of telephone, right? Where you pass it on and somehow the message gets lost. Um, but the other area where communication breaks down is what I call us conversations. So most organizations are very happy to talk about budgets and software and customers and timelines and projects and all that kind of tangible stuff. But as soon as it comes time to talk about, hey, your team and my team, I'm not sure they're working so well, and I didn't like the way you interrupted me in front of the customer the other day. That made me feel like you didn't respect me, and now I'm a bit grumpy with you, and all those kinds of tensions. We tend to avoid having those conversations. And so if you look in most companies and you actually score it conversations to us conversations, it's like 99-1. Now, I'm not saying it should be 50-50. We're there to get stuff done, but you need to have those us conversations to put things right, to realign, to get back on track, to address tensions that maybe weren't a big deal, but if you let them fester, they can become a big deal. So the other type of communication problem structurally is we just don't have the us type conversations that we need to have because they make us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's good. So, kind of piggybacking off that, friction obviously happens when everybody's not on the same page. Um,
Yep.
you know, what role does conflicting goals and priorities, because that can happen too within an organization. The finance team's goals are not necessarily aligned with the marketing team's goals, things like that. What role
That's
does that play in creating that friction? And how can, if I'm a leader, how can I align those objectives to minimize those conflicts?
So, the theory is that you could align it with systems. That's what OKRs are about, right? This is a way to make sure that everybody's working the same goals and that we can cascade those goals down. And there's nothing wrong with the theory, though no doubt that systems like OKRs can help. But you still need conversations. And for example, if the finance team is thinking that what they really need to do is build a bunch of new tools, right? Because that's their priority, get more automation into the company. And the sales team is like, no, but we got to hit a score on the board this quarter. And we need short-term support from sales, from the finance department to do that, not long-term, right? That's, again, a perfectly well-intentioned, there's no bad actors here. But it's very quick for people to decide that somebody is a bad actor, to say, oh, they're doing that because they're trying to, and then fill in the blank, look good in front of the boss, or build their empire, or cover their ass. And so if you don't have that kind of layer of communication where you say, hey, why are you guys focusing on building those systems instead of supporting my salespeople in the field? You can start making assumptions, and those assumptions can grow into kind of problems, frictions that are really much harder to resolve. Whereas if I just come to you and said, hey, I see you building all those systems. We have some short-term needs. I'm sure you've got your good reason to do that. Can we figure this out? Right, then we'll come up with some happy medium and we'll align. We don't even need to go to the CEO for that, right? We can just align priorities between the two of us. But you need a lot of those conversations, and those conversations have to be free of the assumption or the attribution that you are acting in a political way. The number of times you will hear somebody accuse somebody else of behaving politically is X. The number of time that person, if you go and ask them, honestly, were you behaving politically, is like 1/10 of X. Most people think they're doing the right thing, right? So it's that, learning to give people the benefit of the doubt and having that open communication that really prevents these frictions from settling in.
Yeah, for sure. I think, one thing that you just mentioned is just that interaction, not making assumptions and, going to the source. That's the biggest
Yep.
thing. If you have a rift with somebody within your organization and you're just talking to other people about it and you're assuming that they think this, they think that, they said this, that's the first step in crumbling a crumbling organization, or at least a crumbling team. So yeah, it's always good to go to the source first and just talk things out, be adults, and because we're all there for the same goal.
It's
And
exactly
hopefully,
it's exactly right. And so I call these bucket one and bucket two conversations. Bucket one are things we talk about openly in the office, right? Bucket two are things we only talk about at the bar with our buddies. right? Like, oh, those guys in finance, they don't get it. No, they don't get it, right? And I mean, another word for that is gossip, right? And we know that this is not healthy for an organization. So again, I just kind of ask my clients to visualize, how big is your bucket two? How many conversations are going on in bucket two in the bar with your buddies? Everybody looks, it turns a little red. They go, yeah, I got a bunch of those. And it's like, that's normal. That's okay. But what we got to do is systematically fish topics out of bucket two and put them back in bucket one, where we have exactly, as you say, that direct conversation where instead of gossiping about the finance guy, I go to the finance guy and I say, what's up?
Mhm. Yep, absolutely. And that goes across any kind of industry. I mean, any kind of organization. And I like that. I like that analogy. Two buckets. Bucket one needs to be a lot bigger than bucket two, in my opinion.
Exactly.
So, another kind of friction is some power struggles. There's a lot of egos. People have egos wherever you're at. And different people. Hopefully, most of them are in it for the right reasons, but some not so much. And there's some power struggles. How can leaders identify and address those power struggles and those interpersonal conflicts within their organizations to, try to eliminate that friction and foster a more positive work environment?
So that's a great question. And let's be clear, there's no perfect, simple answer. If there were, we wouldn't have all those
Right.
problems. I think the most important thing is what you said, which is leaders have to pay attention to these things. And that is about really paying attention to the quality of the culture, the quality of communications in their organization. And you would think that they all would, but my experience is that many leaders don't feel very confident in that world. They feel confident in the world of customers and code and sales and marketing and raising capital. So they keep doing that and they ignore the noise and the tension that they hear coming up within the organization. And then there is no way to deal with that. And that essentially gives green light to those people to behave even worse. So run that experiment the other way. Even if you're not the most skillful CEO in the world, if you go to the person that you think is behaving in I won't even call it egotistical, less than ideal way, and saying, just classic feedback. Hey, dude, this is what I observe. This is why it kind of rubbed me or some other people the wrong way. I'm not attributing why you did it or that you're a bad person. I'm just saying you need to be aware that didn't come off great. Can you please make an effort to be more team oriented and less, about you? And just know that these are things that are important and that to me and that I'll be watching, right? And if you do that 100 times, hopefully you get a lot less of that behavior. And obviously, if you keep getting that kind of behavior from somebody, then ultimately you have to decide if they're a good culture fit with the organization.
Mhm. So speaking of culture a little bit, I know, this kind of diverts a little bit, but I'm curious your thoughts on, we talked about identifying certain behaviors and things like that. If I'm a leader in an organization, maybe I'm in charge of, hiring and, you know, workplace environment, things like that. How do I really identify or at least have a system um, of identifying the right fit for my culture? I there's a lot of good people. There's a lot of great applicants to our jobs, things like that. But how do I really develop a system that I can use to differentiate those right fits from the wrong fits?
So that's a great question. And I'll just be clear, Bo, I'm not really an expert on recruiting. So I think there are people who know more specifically about how you test for certain like values in an interview. That's not my area of expertise. But I will say a few things. First, we're talking about values, right?
Hmm.
And lots of companies have written down their values and mostly they're bullshit. And we know this, right? And so our value is innovation or our value is selflessness or whatever it is. It's mostly bullshit. And so that is fine, but it doesn't help. You have to get clear on what are the values you actually are going to insist on. And that may be a very short list. It may be just one or two things, but those are the things that are already really true in your organization today. And when you get really honest and, let's say, blunt in naming what those values are, and maybe they don't look as elegant as the ones that you put on the wall, right? Then I think you can have an honest conversation with applicants to say, hey, this is the reality of working in this company. If you don't show up in this way, you're probably not going to enjoy it and you're probably not going to get very far. And so let's talk about that. And then would come the good interview questions. Show me a time when you displayed that value. Again, like that's not my specialty, but I do think that one can test for these things. But the first thing, there's no point in testing for values that are bullshit, right? You got to test for the real ones.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's good for sure. Another question off of that, purpose is a huge thing, in a lot of industries. In the business world specifically, and I act like I'm an expert. I'm not. But I'm curious on how, because business is so cutthroat at times. You're kind of a pawn in the whole game, or you can get that way. How, as an employee, maybe I'm just an entry level employee, and I'm just trying to get my foot in, work my way up, things like that. But I believe, and in my opinion, purpose is a huge thing in driving your behaviors every day and your
Mhm.
driving your motivation and things like that. How do leaders kind of, in an industry that is so results driven, and um, you're judged on a lot of things every day, just black and white things. How do I instill that purpose within my employees? I had a guest on here a couple weeks ago. He said that employees want to work for the greater good, and I know that's hard to think about sometimes as an entry level employee, because you're just you're expected to produce, and there's really no talks of the greater good. So how, as a leader, how do I really hone in on my employees' purposes? And I know that's kind of
Right.
a cliche, but
No, I
how do
think
I
it's
do
I
that?
think it's a great question. So obviously you have some organizations that have a overt purpose, right? We're here to save the world from hunger. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Not very many. Some have a bullshit purpose, right? Like bullshit values. They claim they're there to make the life of such and such better every day, when really what they're there is to sell more of whatever their product is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that fake purposes help very much. So I just want to talk about regular companies that are predominantly driven by commercial and strategic goals, right? They're not trying to save the world. They're not trying to put window dressing on. And what I would say is any really good employee should have a growth mindset, and their purpose should be to grow, right? To get better, to
Mm-hmm.
learn, to improve, to make a bigger contribution, to acquire new skills, to gain more autonomy, to feel more confident in their skills. And the job of a good line manager is to help that person, that maybe that new employee, figure out what that looks like in the context of their job, right? So if you join and I'm your boss, if I just say, here's what I need you to do, Bo, and I need you to do it 12 hours a day to a really high standard, and that's it, right? There's no path from there. You're probably not going to stay motivated for very long.
Right.
But if all I can do is say, by the way, Bo, you know how I'm still double checking all your work? Well, I think we could get to a point in 6 months where I basically don't have to check your work. You come to me when you have a question, but I know your work is good. Would that be motivating? You go, yeah, that'd be cool. So that's already a sense of purpose, right? That's a purpose called I'm growing, I'm developing. I can see that I have a path here that goes beyond what I'm doing now. And so I think that purpose is always a outcome of a discussion between a really great line manager and an employee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Like I said, I was just curious, because I'm not in that industry, and I know that my education background is very purpose driven, and so it's interesting to hear those different perspectives from different industries. So, back to organizational friction a little bit. What impact does the structure of the hierarchy of the organization have on minimizing, not eliminating, minimizing friction?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. Here's a true statement. No one knows how to do org design perfectly. Because if they did, we'd all have that book on our shelves, and we don't.
Right.
So I've watched a million org design projects done by the McKinseys of the world. And I mean, honestly, many of them were diabolically bad. Some were great, right? Org design is an imperfect science. There is no perfect org design for a company. There are always trade-offs. And maybe I'll just give you a funny analogy, but this is the way I think about it. You want all parts of the organization to work in perfect collaboration and coordination, just like when you were 6 people, right? So here's my analogy. Imagine that your organization is the human body and that the goal is to play tennis. So I want my hand and my elbow to work in really good coordination while I swing the racket. And that happens naturally because they're hardwired together, right? Like they're connected. So they're going to move together really naturally. That's what I would call like a hard line in an org design, right? Junior finance guy reports to senior finance guy. Those guys are going to work really well together and they're going to move in coordination. But I also need my knee to move well so that when I step into the ball, the timing is good. But I can't connect my wrist to my knee because pretty soon, right, that's going to look pretty weird. That's not going to work. So I need other mechanisms other than the formal org chart to connect the wrist to the elbow, also to the knee and the feet. And that second layer of coordination happens through, in our body, it happens through electrical signals, right? Going through the brain, saying, do this, do that. Let's all move in one unified way. And it's the same in a company. It's information flows. Finance department is launching new systems. So sales department, get ready. You need to be aware and you need to spend a week learning these new systems and blah, 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 blah. So my view is org design is rarely the solution. It's always the problem, but it's rarely the solution. Better communication, better information flows, recognizing what the limitations of that hardwired organization design are. I'm always going to need to take whatever that is, whatever are in the boxes, and connect all those boxes together. And I can't do that through formal org design, so I have to do it through other mechanisms, which is basically communication channels, meetings, information systems, ad hoc sync ups, whatever it might be.
Yeah. So have you noticed the problem of resistance to change being a source of organizational friction? And if so, how can I as a leader facilitate smoother transitions during those periods of changes?
That is a wonderful question. And this, I think, brings us to a favorite topic of mine, which is what do we mean by leadership and how is it different from good management? So, in an organization where everything is flowing fine, everybody knows what their job is, everything's kind of going okay. In other words, without change, people hopefully don't have much fear. And management is all you need. Management is setting goals, cascading those goals, aligning incentives, sharing information, directing people, giving them feedback, all the normal stuff, right? Now, all of a sudden, the market's changed. We got to do a big pivot. People have fear. And leadership is all about recognizing that and giving people the courage to come on a new journey which has got more uncertainty and less clarity than the path they were on before. And so the old management technique of I'll just put out a memo and I'll tell you what the next 3, tasks are or the objectives for this quarter, that doesn't work. That doesn't overcome resistance to change. So you now have to engage with people emotionally and help them to not only see the vision, but to understand why it's going to be safe for them, why it's going to be good ultimately for them to come on this new path following you. And I mean, if the definition of leadership is somebody who has followers, then obviously the more scary that path is, the better leader you have to be to still have followers. So I would say it's, absolutely, you often find that there's a lot of friction around resistance to change, and that's where leadership becomes the number one tool.
Yep, that's good. So, going back to this kind of goes into the communication piece, but how can I, as a leader, foster a culture of just straight transparency? I want to develop trust within my employees. I want to be trusted as a leader. I want to be transparent. I want to collaborate with my people efficiently in order to minimize that friction and promote the togetherness and synergy within my organization.
Yeah. So it's not about going off and having company picnics. Like, I'm all for company picnics, but that is not going to do the job, right? The way I think about it is that there are conversations that the company finds comfortable. How are sales doing and what's going on with that project? And then there are the conversations that the organization might find uncomfortable. These are the bucket two ones, the ones we have at the bar. And that's where lack of transparency lives. That's where mistrust lives. That's where failure to collaborate lives. And so what you need to do as a leader is bring light into all of that, get it out of the darkness of that dark bar and bring it back into the organization and role model. We can have a conversation about this. You heard we lost our funding, that next round of funding didn't come through, and now you're all gossiping in the bar about whether the company's going to go bankrupt. No. We're going to have a real conversation right here and right now. I can't share every number with you, but I'm going to tell you straight up what's true, what's not true, what the issues are, what the risks are, and we're going to talk about it. Or you heard that the guy in Department X was being fired because they were incompetent or stealing from the company. Like, now we're going to have a real conversation about what's going, again, maybe not about that individual, maybe that's confidential, but about what the implications are, about what that means for this company, about what it means for you. And so it's just constantly role modeling, taking these conversations that are happening in the bar, the uncomfortable conversations, which is where mistrust and lack of transparency live, and bring them into the daylight and role modeling how we can have constructive, open, reasonable, fact-based conversations and as transparent as we can be. Of course, there's never 100% transparency.
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. So, transition a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your book. Who's your target audience for that, and who might benefit the most by reading it?
So, as I said, what I noticed is that founders and CEOs of growth companies run into these problems pretty systematically. They first show up around 50 people. By 100, you feel the pain. By 150, the pain is acute. By 300, your organization is bound up in frictions and is not the nimble, super high performing startup that it once was, or unless you did something about it. And so it's really for people on that growth trajectory from 50 to 500 or 1,000. I think it can be helpful to leaders in large enterprise, but it's specifically focused on that scale up. And definitely not just CEOs, any leader, any manager in those companies will face these problems within their areas and with teams, both their own team and the other cross-functional teams they collaborate with. But I'd say definitely that C-suite leadership group. The book only came out less than 2 months ago, so I just ran my first workshop with a team where everybody on the team had read the book before the workshop. And man, did it make a difference. They were 2 steps ahead of me, and we just made so much progress because they had shared understanding of like, what are the problems? How do we deal with them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. So, where can my listeners, maybe I'm listening to this and I'm interested. Maybe I'm trying to start up a business, or trying to scale.
Yeah.
Where can my listeners find you and learn more about the work you do?
So they can buy the book, of course. So Smooth Scaling, Amazon, any major bookstore. It is in the physical bookshops all around North America. My website, robbier.com, robbier.com, has quite a bit of stuff, and also would enable them to get in touch with me. And I also have a Substack, which has a bunch of articles on there that would give them so if they want a freebie before they buy the book, you can go to my Substack and get a sense of, what I believe and how I think.
Awesome. 2 more questions for you. Personal questions here. Looking back over your career, what's been the most rewarding part for you?
By far, the most rewarding part of my career, and I think this would be true for many other people, are those magic moments when you find yourself part of a truly high-performing team, like a real, true high-performing team. And you feel you're part of something that is bigger than you. It's no longer about you. You feel you can, climb huge mountains, tackle all problems. You have emotional support. You have fun. You're laughing. You're learning. People are giving you grief, but in a good-hearted way, right, to help you become better. And there's just something so powerful and magical about that experience. So I've been lucky enough to have that, I guess, 3 times in my life. And a lot of the reason I do the work that I do is to give others that same experience.
Mm-hmm. At some point, your career is going to end. What do you want to be remembered by, and what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, mostly I want to be remembered as a good dad. I've got 2 kids and a decent human being. But in a professional context, I really do hope, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, but I really do think that when you look at all the literature, all the books and blog posts out there for entrepreneurs, we have learned so much in the last 30 years. Lean Startup by Eric Ries, how to get product market fit, and all the stuff about how to raise capital and safe notes. And there's been an explosion of knowledge in how to build startups more effectively, more efficiently, more straight line. And then you hit this barrier of, okay, I've got a good business, but my organization is full of friction and I don't seem to be able to scale it. And there just hasn't been any good guiding knowledge on that. If you go to Google and type, how do I build a high-performing organization that scales? Google kind of doesn't have an answer, doesn't know where to point. I hope in the future it will point to my book and that people will go, oh, that's the problem you're having? Go read Rob's book. So that'd be a wonderful legacy.
Absolutely. Well, Rob, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your insight, and I hope there's some listeners out there that can benefit from this. And if you want more info on what Rob does, be sure to check the episode description. There'll be some links in there that you can take a look at. And Rob, again, thank you for coming on, and I look forward to following you the rest of the way.
Bo, it's been great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Lead to Win podcast. If you're listening this week, make sure to drop a rating on whatever app you're listening on. I'd love to hear from listeners and make this podcast even more relevant to you. Also, make sure to follow the Lead to Win podcast on social media. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Give us a follow and feel free to share the content. Again, thanks for listening this week. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. See you next Tuesday.